Have you ever looked at your analytics dashboard and you see that listeners are dropping off in the middle of your episodes? Maybe they listen to the first few seconds, maybe they're getting through the first few minutes, but not all of them are listening all the way through, which means that not only are they not hearing the valuable information that you're sharing with them, they're not hearing your calls to action. So no wonder they're not converting into leads. And to fix this problem, I have got top podcaster and communications expert Brandon Lucero in the studio with me to dive deep into 4 ways that you can keep your podcast listeners engaged from the start of the episode all the way to the very end, and turn every single episode into a powerful tool for lead generation that drives conversions. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Brandon, I am so pumped to have you back on the show because not many people know this, but you have been somewhat of a secret weapon behind the scenes in our business over the last 18 months or so. In fact, in working with you just over the course of the last year, we were able to double the revenue of our signature offer. Not by changing anything in the program, but just by learning how to communicate it in a way that makes people want to take action. So I can't wait to have you break down how to apply some of these proven principles for our podcasts. Because one of the biggest things that I hear from hosts all the time is, Courtney, I am giving away my best content for free in every single episode. People tell me they love the podcast. That episode was exactly what I needed to hear, but they're not converting into clients and customers. So I'd love to have you start by breaking down what we, as podcast hosts, need to be doing inside of the body of our episodes to make someone pay attention, to hook them in, to make them want to listen till the end.
To make people pay attention, your stuff has to stand out and also just be really hyper relevant. And I think, where most people just default is they just kind of go to like how-to content, but they don't put any like triggers in there or things that pull the right person in or speak to the person's subconscious or any of that stuff. Just to give you a quick example, it's, they might create a video titled like how to create engaging content. And it's like, well, there's so many competitors and there's so many people like teaching how to create engaging content. Now you're just blending in with everybody else. But we can start to do little things like add in an identity. So instead of how to create engaging content, it's how course creators create engaging content. And then if we want to take it a step further, it's like, well, what's the pain point around content? Well, it's very time consuming. So, okay, how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes or less. So just by switching a couple things around, now our titles are way more relevant, way more effective. But the 2 things that we did there is we added in identity and problems. And so the problems are the biggest piece of a lot of this because your audience is going through a problem right now. That's why they're going to buy from you. They're going to buy your course, your product, your service, whatever it may be, because they want some sort of problem to be done with, ended, gone. And most people don't know what those are. They don't know what the problem actually is. So when we start to use the problems in our communication, in our ads, we use them to inspire titles like what we just did. What starts to happen is your content becomes more relevant to where your audience is right now versus where they want to try to go to. Because sometimes they don't even know where they want to go to. And sometimes if you focus too much on your knowledge and skills and degrees and certifications, you focus too much on solution, but they're not even there yet. They're still at the problem and they need to feel that you hear them, understand them. And by the way, they're making those decisions automatically. So like if something comes up in their newsfeed, there's a subconscious automatic reaction of I should click or not click. But if you start to incorporate these things like the problems and identities and all this stuff into your messaging, into your content, you start to get more of those automatic clicks on your stuff.
It's so true. Yes. Because, when you're scrolling Instagram late at night and 11 p.m. and you need to go to bed, but you're just scrolling to the next reel, you scroll and then suddenly something makes you stop. You might sit there, you might watch that video all the way to the end. Maybe you save it. Maybe you like it. Maybe you leave a comment. But yet none of us ever stop to think about, well, what made me stop and engage with that content versus the other 12, 15, 20 things that I just scrolled past. So this is so important and something that I definitely have seen in our own podcast and all of the messaging throughout our business when we started leaning into not only who specifically are we creating this content for, but also what are they experiencing right now that they want solved. Things really started to click. And I often think of it like this as kind of a gory metaphor, but I'm like, if you had like an arm, like a knife wound in your arm, right? You got a knife sticking out of your arm, and you go to the ER and the doctor's like, oh, imagine how nice it's going to be when you can type again and when you can like throw the ball
Yeah.
with your kid and stuff. They're like, you're like, I don't care, doc, get the knife out of my arm,
Yeah.
because that's all you can think about. And I think about that in terms of like, who's listening to your podcast, who's consuming your content, who's attending your webinars. Right now, they have a problem they want solved. So
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that in my own experience too with our content.
What you want to hear when that knife's in your arm is not like what you said. Imagine you can throw the ball. It's like, you want things like, it looks like it's gone in about 2 inches and we could probably take care of this problem in the next 10 minutes. You're not going to feel any pain. Like, that's the sort of language you want. And I love that example because that's where so many people are, is they're like, let's talk about the throwing of the ball and like what's going to look like 6 months from now. And it's like, no, like we need to talk about what their unwanted experience now, make them feel heard, understood, validated, and safe. That's what they want.
Well, let's talk about that, because I have seen this a lot with podcast hosts that we work with where they are experts. They are good at what they do. They are very knowledgeable. And it's why they gravitate to the long form platform, because it's really difficult to try to fit all of that expertise into like a 7-second video for Instagram. And so they naturally gravitate towards this type of teaching platform. But when they're teaching, they're talking from their own perspective, their own expertise of where they are in their journey. And they're actually losing their listener, and they're causing their listener to tune out when they do that. Can you speak to that a little bit and why that happens?
It comes down to relevancy. It just comes down to, because again, those things are automated. Those feelings of like, I'm interested, this is pulling me in, I'm bored, I'm whatever. And so when you start talking outside the awareness of your audience, like if they're not aware they need something, or that's not what's on their mind, then you lost them. Like your example with the knife, like the second the doctor starts talking about throwing of the ball and stuff, the person's mind is probably automatically going like, great, like hurry up so we can get to like what actually is going on with my arm. So when your communication is like too deep, you're teaching too much, talking too much about solution, you're not within the awareness of your audience. Like, and this is what awareness means. If you're a parent and you yell at your kids, if you dig down deep as to why that happened, it usually goes back to like your own traumas. Like it's a trigger, which is a past trauma. And if you heal your traumas, the trigger's gone, and then you don't have to yell at your kids as much and you're more grounded. And a lot of parenting coaches try to like tell people that, but people are like, I don't want to heal my trauma. I just want to stop yelling at my kid, So that means you need to start creating content that's more focused on yelling at the kid, not healing trauma as a parent. And you can build down to that, but that's usually what's going on with people when your stuff's not landing, or people aren't like resonating or listening, is that you're just outside the awareness. You're teaching too much. You're tricking them into thinking they have everything they need. But again, you're just not as relevant, and you're only using one way to add value. There's multiple ways to add value inside people's lives, but most people just focus on one, which is delivering information. And that's like trying to get encyclopedia to the top of the best-selling charts. It just isn't going to happen. So that's usually the reason why all that stuff is happening.
Yeah. And it's not like you're intentionally tricking them. It's just that you don't know that there are other ways to add value. So can you break that down for us? Like, what are these other ways to add value?
Right. Well, the other ways to add, there's a lot of different ways. So one of them is to make people feel heard, validated, and understood. So when you talk about the problems and what they're doing and their situation, they're going to feel like, oh my gosh, like this person is explaining things to me that never been explained to me before. I didn't realize that this is happening because of this. Shifting of perspective. So if you're able to get someone to see something differently, if they have a perspective that's causing a problem in their life, and you get them to see it completely differently and you shift their perspective, is incredibly powerful for people. Connecting with people. So talking about values and identities and beliefs to build a connection, a human to human connection, is another way to add value. But those are 4 of them right there that most people just, and there's more, but most people aren't even using those, even those 4 simple ones.
Yeah. And so this brings us to the body of the episode, right? When you're actually in that part of the episode where you're teaching your content, you're giving that value, you're trying to educate people. And if you hadn't caught the episode a couple of episodes back where I walked through the high converting episode framework, I recommend listening to that, because that's where I kind of give you the overview of a flow of what a listener needs and what the journey is through the episode itself to keep them listening till the very end, and to really create that desire and demand to want to take the call to action that you're giving them. But in that body content, we didn't dive into this in that episode. And Brandon, I'm hoping you can just give us some tips here for how we can make this more effective when you're actually in the teaching portion. And let's say it's the middle of the episode, it's 10, maybe it's 15 minutes long. And now this is the part where you're educating them.
So there's two things I'm going to go into. One of them is the one and more method. So this is how we sort of position that we have something more, we have an offer, but we're also adding value to you at the same time. And I kind of did it a little bit earlier when we talked about 4 ways to add value. So what I did was I said, here's 4 ways right here. There's a lot more ways to do it, but even these 4 simple things, these 4 simple ones, most people aren't using. So that's the one and more method. And we love using this inside of webinars or even like your podcast episodes when you know there's a download or a next step or a workshop. You just teach one of your things inside of it. So maybe, Courtney, for you, it might be something like you're going to teach them how to title a really effective podcast. And you might say, okay, guys, we have 9 different ways to title podcasts on this upcoming workshop that we have, but I'm going to give you my number one method right now. With this one method, you should be able to see an increase in the next 24 hours with your podcast. So here we go. And so what it does is it allows people to feel like, oh my gosh, like, okay, I'm going to get this thing, this one thing, but there is more. But the thought of like, oh, she's not giving us everything doesn't ever come up because they're sitting there going like, I'm so excited, but you're planting these seeds throughout your entire launch or workshop or whatever it may be, that there is more. And so I love using that all the time. I use it in all of our launches and stuff because it also gives you an opportunity to talk about your offer or your product as you're teaching and adding value. Does that make sense?
It does. And I do this in our webinars now that you've taught us this. We're teaching the workshop and I'm like, guys, there's 7 things that make up this system that I'm about to give you. But I'm going to give you one of my favorites right now because it's going to help you X, Y, and Z. And then people are like hanging on your every word. It's kind of counterintuitive because you would think that people would be angry with you because you're not giving them all of it. But really the opposite is true. They actually lean in because they're like, oh my gosh, okay, you're going to give me this one that you know is going to be really effective. Here's what it's going to do for me. And now I want to learn the other ones because I see what you just taught me and I see the value in that.
Well, it would be a different story if you sat there and said like, your ad or your email or whatever said, I'm going to give you all 9. And then all of a sudden you don't. But they have no idea how many there are. So you're going to say, hey guys, we're going to teach you how to create really effective titles. I have 9 ways to do it. I'm going to give you one right now. What we have to follow that up with is why I'm only giving you one. So it could be like, I don't want to overwhelm you or whatever it may be. And then what they could do with that one. So it'd be like, with this one, you should or could see X, Y, and Z. So when you follow up with those things, they're like more excited than they are like, why aren't you giving me all the things? So that's what we like to do. We like to use that all the time, anytime we teach something.
And this is helpful from an expert's point of view because you've got so much knowledge in your brain that you could teach. And a lot of times I find when it comes to an episode, what happens is people will start at one place and then they'll go off on a tangent. The next thing we're talking about this over here. And it's like, wait a minute, the topic of the episode was this. And one thing that we're often encouraging our clients and our students to do is focus your episodes on one thing. Because guess what? You're going to have another episode next week. You're going to have another episode next week. And you might have a workshop that you want to lead them to. And you have a whole program that you probably want them to enroll in. And so keeping that focus, it also, I find as an expert and being someone who has a lot of knowledge and I have a lot that I want to share, it helps me develop discipline in how I'm sharing my content and not giving away too much in a way that either makes people think, oh, well, I have everything I need now. Thanks. See you. Bye. Or also, now I feel overwhelmed because I'm drinking from a fire hose. You just told me way too many things and I can't join your program because I have too much to implement right here with what you just gave me.
There's 3 types of trust people need in order to buy from you. And one of those types of trust is they need to trust your process. And in order to trust your process, they have to see how they can go through it. Number 1. Number 2, they also have to trust their own ability to do it. So when you go into what you were just talking about, like the overwhelm and too much information, they don't trust your process fully to the level they should. But more importantly, they actually don't trust their own ability to do your process because it's so confusing and they're so overwhelmed just from a single video or a podcast. So you have to be really careful with that. So one of the things I like doing, and it goes back to, again, problems and mistakes again, but it's like when I teach something on a podcast or a webinar, instead of just sitting there and saying, okay, guys, here's step 1 and here's how to do it. I say things like, okay, so step 1, we're about to get into it. Now, if you have the problem of creating really good content and it's not getting seen, no one's clicking on it, this is going to be really, really powerful for you because we're going to show you how to create titles for your content that get people to automatically click on it. Look, the biggest mistakes that people make, they blindly create titles. They don't put any triggers in there. They don't use identity. So here's how we do it. And that's a very quick example, but there's like three things. I started with the problem, and here's the problem that this is the step that's going to solve for you. I named and told them what the step was. Then I told them the mistakes they are doing that are causing the problem. And if we do that on a podcast or a webinar, that could take up to like 5 to 6 minutes. And if you have 5 steps, that's 25 minutes of your webinar or your hour-long podcast episode or whatever it is, used with content that pulls people in and keeps them engaged without delivering the information. So what I find is when I use that sort of framework or process when doing step-by-step content, it keeps people engaged, it makes it relevant, but also I won't have enough time to overwhelm them even if I wanted to. So I love using that.
Yeah. Well, also to just put this into perspective for people, just this week, I taught a workshop. 93% of the people who showed up live stayed till the very end. And we ran 15 minutes over because there were so many questions. I was trying to get to as many as I could. People were that engaged. And our call booking rate was extremely high. I don't have the exact percentage, but we had like of the people that were there, I think it was 10 or 15% that booked calls because they wanted to take the next step. But it was exactly what you're saying, Brandon, where it was like, prior to this, I'd teach a workshop and we'd have people drop off in the middle or, 75% of the way through. They wouldn't stay till the end. They weren't very engaged in the chat. Or then I would pitch to book a call with us if you want to learn how to implement what I'm sharing with you today. And like, I would hear from people like, you've already given me so much. I feel like I need to implement this first before like even wanting to be able to take the next step with you. So we wouldn't see calls coming in that was affecting our sales. So it was this whole like chain of events that would happen, but just shifting this one thing in the way that we started to communicate just with this one method that you're teaching us, one and more like that, it changed so much for us.
It works really well. And we've used it in multiple people's launches and they've all done their best launches in using it. So it's like finding that dance of adding value, giving out information, incorporating other ways of adding value, but being relevant and engaging at the same time.
Yeah. And then ultimately what this does is it helps your person feel heard. They feel validated and it increases that trust that is a prerequisite for a sale.
Yep.
And so ultimately doing this over time in all of your episodes, and again, this is just one way to do this, but to deliver that value in a way that a person receives as valuable, it creates that desire and demand for whatever it is that you're going to action that you're going to ask them to take.
Yep.
Awesome. Brandon, thank you for breaking this down for us. This is super helpful. For those listening, Brandon has an entire podcast dedicated to helping you with this kind of stuff. And not just messaging for your podcast, but messaging for your entire business. All of your launches, all of your webinars, anything and everything that you do, your website copy, your emails that you send out. I mean, messaging it's in every single aspect of your business. So we'll link to the show in the show notes here. Go check it out. Brandon, thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
One of the things that you heard Brandon mention multiple times inside this episode was this idea of problem-specific language or problem-solving content. And I asked Brandon after this interview if he would stick around and break down exactly what he means by that and show you how you can apply this to your podcast too. So don't go anywhere because we've got all of that coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.